My parents demanded I drop out of college to pay for my golden siblings' education, but when I refused and left home, years later, I succeeded, and they were left broken. I'm 20 years old. I'm in my second year of university studying psychology. And I need to tell this story because what happened 6 months ago literally changed my entire life. And there are still days when I can't believe it actually happened. I guess I should start by explaining what my family was like before all this, because to understand why my parents did what they did, you need to know how the dynamics worked in my house. You know, who was the favorite and who was basically invisible. I grew up being the middle child. Between Alexander, who's 24 now and was always the golden child of the family, and Hannah, my younger sister, who's 17, and was like the perfect little princess who could never do anything wrong. My mom always had this weird thing where everything revolved around Alexander, literally everything. And my dad, who's a lawyer and supposedly a logical and rational person, basically supported whatever my mom decided. I was like the family's plan B. You know what I mean? The one who was there in case something went wrong with the other two, but never the priority, never the one who received attention or real support. When Alexander got into law school like 3 years ago, my parents were euphoric. I mean, my mom literally cried with excitement, and my dad went around telling everyone that his son was going to be a lawyer like him. They paid his entire tuition without batting an eye, bought him an apartment near campus. Yeah, a whole apartment just for him. Gave him a new car and even paid his monthly expenses so he wouldn't have to work while studying. With Hannah, it was similar. They had this huge savings fund for her college. They enrolled her in every extracurricular activity you can think of since she was like 5 years old. Piano lessons, ballet, French, tennis, basically anything that would make her look more impressive on college applications. And then there was me. Don't get me wrong, my parents paid for my first year of college, but always, and with this air that they were doing me this huge favor, like I should be eternally grateful for something they gave my siblings without thinking twice. I never had extra classes in anything. They never asked me what I really wanted to study, and when I told them I wanted to study psychology, my dad literally laughed and said something like, "Well, at least it's not as expensive as medicine." My mom just commented that she hoped I would find a good husband who could support me, because with psychology I wasn't going to make much money. Which was super encouraging, obviously. The thing is, I always knew I wasn't the favorite. That was clear since I was like 8 years old and my mom missed my school play because Alexander had a soccer game the same day. But I never thought they would go as far as they did. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. All the signs were there. But I guess a part of me still had hope that they would see me as something more than a family employee or a source of financial backup. Everything exploded in March of this year. It was a Friday afternoon and I had come home for the weekend because I needed to pick up some things and, honestly, because my mom had been sending me messages all week saying we needed to have an important family meeting. I thought maybe they were going to announce they were moving or something. I don't know. Anything but what actually happened. I arrived around 6 in the evening and my dad was already home, which was weird because he never left the office before 8, and my mom had this serious face that made me nervous immediately. Alexander was there too, sitting on the couch with his arms crossed, and Hannah was in her room supposedly doing homework. My mom told us to all sit in the living room because we had to talk about something very important about the family's future, and I sat there thinking, okay, this feels super formal and strange. My dad started talking about family responsibilities and how sometimes we all have to make sacrifices for the common good, and I was like, where is this going? And then my mom dropped the bomb. They told me they needed me to quit university. Just like that, without any preamble or anything, just, "Charlotte, we need you to quit university and get a full-time job." I literally froze, unable to process what I had just heard, and before I could even react, my dad continued explaining his logic, which, by the way, was the most twisted and manipulative thing I've ever heard in my life. Turns out Alexander needed more money for law school because he had decided to take additional summer courses, which he chose himself. Nobody forced him. And Hannah was going to start college next year, and they wanted to send her to a super expensive private university because supposedly it was the best for her future. And here comes the part that still makes my blood boil when I think about it. My dad looked me straight in the eyes and told me that I was the most suitable to make this sacrifice because, and I quote, literally, "Your career isn't that demanding and you can pick it up again any time. Plus you already have 2 years of credits so you wouldn't lose that much." My mom added that it was the most logical thing, because Alexander was at a critical point in his education, and Hannah had so much potential that it would be a waste not to invest in her now, and that well, I had always been more independent and capable of managing on my own. Can you believe it? They were basically telling me to quit my studies, my dreams, my entire future, to work and pay for my siblings' education because they were more important than me. It wasn't a question or a request. It was an expectation, as if it was obvious. I should agree because that's how things worked in our family. My mom even had a list of possible jobs I could get, all basic office jobs that didn't require a college degree. And she told me that with my personality, I could probably move up quickly and make good money. I sat there in total shock for what felt like hours, but was probably just a few seconds, and the first thing I felt wasn't even anger. It was like a deep sadness mixed with this horrible feeling of confirmation, like I finally had absolute proof that I had never really mattered to them. Alexander didn't say anything, just stared at the floor, avoiding my gaze. And I was thinking, are you seriously going to sit there quiet while they offer you my future on a silver platter? Then my dad, using his lawyer voice that probably works great in court but in that moment just made me want to scream, started explaining to me why this made sense from an economic and family perspective. He said they had done the math, and that if I worked full-time for 2 or 3 years, I could contribute significantly to my siblings' educational expenses, and that later, when they were already established, I could go back to studying with their support. I told them, you want me to put my life on pause for 2 years to pay for Alexander and Hannah's education, and I'm supposed to be grateful for the opportunity to come back eventually? My mom got all defensive and started with the speech about how family helps each other and that I was being selfish by not even considering what they were asking. That they had given me everything for 20 years and that now it was my turn to give back, as if my existence was a debt I had to pay. I asked them why Alexander couldn't get a job while studying, like literally millions of law students do, or why Hannah couldn't go to a more economical state university, or why the hell I was the only one who had to sacrifice my goals. My dad told me I was being dramatic and that I didn't understand the realities of life, that sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for the greater good. I told him that the greater good apparently never included me, that I had always been the last priority and that now they wanted me to literally give up my future to finance theirs. My mom started crying, something she did every time she didn't get what she wanted, and said she couldn't believe her own daughter was being so cruel and ungrateful after everything they had done for me. And that's when something inside me just broke. Not in the sense that I broke down crying or anything, but suddenly everything became super clear. Like I was seeing the complete situation for the first time, without the layers of manipulation and guilt they had always used to control me. I told them, very calmly considering I was shaking inside, that I wasn't going to quit university, that I would finish my degree with or without their help, and that if that meant we had to end our relationship, then so be it. The silence that followed was like deafening. My dad looked at me like I had slapped him, and my mom stopped crying immediately, which was revealing in itself because it showed the tears were pure theater. My dad told me that if that was my decision, then I should pack my things and leave, that they weren't going to support someone who didn't want to be part of the family. My mom added that if I left, I shouldn't expect any kind of help from them ever again. No money, no place to stay, nothing. That I was going to be completely alone. I got up from the couch and went upstairs to my room. I mean, the room that had been mine my entire life but apparently wasn't anymore. I started packing all my things, clothes, books, photos. Well, the few photos where I appeared because most of the family albums were of Alexander and Hannah. Everything that was mine. Alexander showed up at the door at some point while I was putting things in boxes, and I expected him to finally say something, to apologize or to admit how absurd all this was, but he just said, "I'm sorry, Charlie," and left, which somehow hurt more than if he hadn't said anything. It took me like 2 hours to pack everything. And during that time, my parents didn't come upstairs even once to try to stop me or talk to me, which was also revealing because it showed they really didn't care if I left or not. They only cared that I did what they wanted. I came down with 3 large suitcases and some boxes, and my dad was in his study working on the computer as if nothing was happening, and my mom was in the kitchen preparing dinner, also acting completely normal. I told them I was leaving, and my dad just nodded without even turning to look at me, and my mom said something like, "I hope you know what you're doing, Charlotte. This is your decision." I left that house with all my belongings, called an Uber, because I didn't even have my own car. The car I used was technically the family's, and I left with absolutely no plan of what to do next. In the Uber, I finally allowed myself to process everything and started crying, not so much from sadness as from rage, and that horrible feeling of having lost something I maybe never really had in the first place. I called my friend Melissa from campus. She and I had taken several classes together and had become close during the last year, and I explained very vaguely that I had had a serious family problem and needed a place to stay that night. Melissa didn't even hesitate. She told me to come to her apartment immediately. She lived off campus with 2 roommates, and when I got there and told her the whole story, she got furious on my behalf, which honestly helped me a lot because it validated that I wasn't crazy to think what my parents had done was completely unacceptable. I stayed on Melissa's couch that first night, basically unable to sleep at all, just staring at the ceiling and thinking about how I had gotten to this point and what I was going to do now. I had no savings because my parents had never encouraged me to work during the school semester. They said I should concentrate on my studies, although curiously, they never cared if Alexander had a job, and my financial aid only covered tuition, not living expenses, or housing. The following Monday, I went directly to the university's financial aid office and explained my situation, well, an edited version where I basically said my family had abruptly cut off all financial support and I needed options urgently. The counselor, whose name was Diane and who was literally an angel, helped me fill out forms for additional financial aid and connected me with resources on campus for students in difficult situations. Turns out there were several emergency programs for students facing financial or family crises, and I qualified for most of them. She also helped me apply for on-campus housing for next semester. There were some rooms available for emergency cases, and connected me with work-study opportunities that would pay better than regular campus jobs. In 1 week, I basically had a complete plan for how I was going to survive financially. It wasn't going to be easy, and I was definitely going to have to work while studying, but it was possible, and that was what mattered. The person who really saved me was my Aunt Victoria, my mom's sister, who had always been like the black sheep of the family because she dedicated herself to art instead of having a serious career, and because she had decided not to get married or have children. My parents basically saw her as a failure and rarely invited her to family events, but she had always been kind to me on the few occasions I saw her, and I secretly always thought she was the coolest of all the adults in my family. I wrote her a message telling her what had happened. I didn't really expect anything. I just felt that someone else in the family should know the truth before my parents created their own version of events. Victoria called me literally 10 minutes later, super upset but also super supportive, and told me she knew exactly how my mom and dad were because she had grown up seeing that favoritism all her life. My mom had always been my grandparents' favorite, and Victoria had always been the disappointment. She offered me financial help. Not much because she wasn't rich either, but said she could send me like $300 a month to help with expenses. And more importantly, she told me that during vacations and school breaks I could stay at her house. She lived like 2 hours from campus in a bigger city where she had an art studio. I literally started crying when she offered me all this because it was more support than my own parents had ever voluntarily given me. Like 2 weeks passed and I finally got to move into my room in the campus dorm. It was small and I shared a bathroom with other girls on the floor, but it was mine and nobody could take it away from me. I started my 2 work-study jobs, one at the campus library and another helping in the psychology department with research, and although I was exhausted all the time, at least I was building my own life on my own terms. Alexander sent me a long message like a month after everything, and to be honest, I expected it to be more manipulation or attempts to make me feel guilty, but it surprised me. He apologized. Really apologized. Not with excuses or justifications, but acknowledging that it had been wrong all these years, that he knew mom and dad treated me differently and that he had never said anything because that system worked for him. He admitted he had felt trapped in this role of perfect son and that the pressure was horrible. But that didn't justify that he had left me alone when I most needed someone to defend me. And then he told me something that left me like in total shock. He told me he was going to quit law school. That he hated law. That he had always hated it but had chosen it because it was what dad wanted and because he didn't know how to tell him no. He said he wanted to be a teacher, that he had done volunteer work teaching in a community program and realized that was what really made him happy, but that he had never dared to pursue that because he knew dad would see it as a waste of his potential. I responded that I was glad he was finally going to do something he wanted to do, and that I hoped he would find the happiness I was trying to find. But I also told him I needed time before we could have a real relationship as siblings, because I was still processing all the pain that had accumulated over years. He understood and told me he would be there when I was ready. Meanwhile, my parents started sending me messages, not apologizing obviously, but trying to manipulate me into coming back. My mom sent texts like, "The house feels so empty without you. I miss my girl," as if nothing had happened and as if they hadn't literally kicked me out of the house. My dad sent more practical messages about things I supposedly needed to sign or pick up, probably attempts to get me to come see them so they could pressure me in person. I didn't respond to any of those messages for like 2 months, and then one day I decided I needed to speak my truth without filters. I sent them a long message, probably too long, where I basically put everything on the table. I told them exactly how they had made me feel my entire life, how the favoritism toward Alexander and Hannah had been obvious and painful, how they had treated me as if my only value was serving the family, and how asking me to quit university had been the straw that broke the camel's back, but not the only problem, just the most recent, in a long history of making me feel less important than my siblings. I told them I wasn't going to apologize for choosing myself for the first time in my life, and that if they ever wanted to have a relationship with me, they had to acknowledge the damage they had caused and make real changes, not just expect me to come back and pretend everything was fine. My dad responded with a wall of text about how I didn't understand the realities of being a parent and making difficult decisions, basically without acknowledging anything I had said. My mom only put, "You're being very hurtful, Charlotte," which was ironic considering everything. Then other relatives started appearing, cousins and aunts and uncles I didn't even know had my number, all with opinions about the situation. Apparently, my parents had been telling their version of events where I was the ungrateful daughter who had abandoned the family out of pure selfishness, without mentioning, obviously, that they had asked me to quit university to finance my siblings. Some relatives sent me messages saying I should respect my parents. Others just wanted gossip. And a few, including a cousin I had always liked, wrote me privately to tell me they knew there was more to the story and that I had their support. The next bomb dropped like in July. My mom sent me a very casual message saying they had decided to sell the house and move to a smaller place now that all the kids were out. They didn't ask my opinion, didn't consult me about things of mine that might still be in the house, just informed me as if I were a stranger. And honestly, at that point, I didn't care anymore. That house had never really felt like my home anyway. It had always been more a place where I existed while they lived their lives centered on Alexander and Hannah. I blocked their numbers after that. I decided that keeping that line of communication open was only hurting me. They weren't going to change, and I didn't need to constantly expose myself to their attempts at manipulation and guilt. It was liberating, honestly, like closing a door that had been open, letting cold air in for too long. What I didn't expect was for Hannah to contact me. It was in August, just before she was going to start college, that same super expensive private university for which I was supposedly supposed to sacrifice my future. She sent me a long and vulnerable message where she apologized for everything. She said she had been blind for a long time about how mom and dad treated me because she was in the bubble of being the favorite, but that after I left and Alexander quit law school, she started to see how the family really worked. She said that mom and dad were now putting all their pressure on her, expecting her to be perfect at everything, and constantly telling her she couldn't disappoint them like Alexander and I had done, and that only then did she understand how toxic that environment was. She told me she regretted not saying anything when they kicked me out, that she was afraid of losing their support but now realized that support came with impossible conditions to meet. We talked on the phone that night, probably the first real conversation we had ever had in our lives, and it was weird but good. I told her about my entire experience growing up in that house, things she had never noticed because she was on the other side of the equation. And she told me about the constant pressure she felt to maintain this image of perfection. We decided to stay in touch and build a real relationship as sisters, not based on our family's dynamics, but on who we really were as people. In September, I started my 3rd year of university, and something changed in me. I mean, I had always been a good student, but now I had this different motivation. I wasn't studying to meet anyone's expectations, but because I genuinely wanted to. I joined a support group on campus for students who came from toxic families or had been disconnected from their families, and hearing the stories of other people who had gone through similar or even worse things was incredibly healing. In that group, I met incredible people who became my chosen family, people who understood me in a way my biological family never did. We shared resources on how to handle family trauma, how to build financial independence, how to deal with the guilt and pain of cutting ties with family, and honestly, those conversations helped me more than anything I had experienced before. The psychology department found out about my participation in that group and offered me a paid position to help develop a formal peer support program for students facing family crises. It was perfect. It combined my personal experience with what I was learning academically, and besides, it paid better than my other jobs, so I could quit one and have more time to study. Now I'm here, almost 7 months after that family meeting that changed everything, and honestly, I'm okay. Better than okay in some aspects. Yes, there are difficult moments where I miss the idea of having a normal and supportive family. And yes, it still hurts when I see other people with their parents and siblings having healthy and loving relationships. But I no longer feel trapped or invisible, or like my only value was what I could do for others. I have my own plans, my own dreams, and for the first time in my life, nobody is telling me those plans are less important than someone else's. I'm going to graduate next year, probably with honors considering how my grades are going. And I'm already researching master's programs because I want to specialize in family therapy, which makes sense considering everything I've lived through. Hannah comes to visit me every few weeks. We get coffee and talk about how she's handling university and our parents' pressure. And I help her as I can with strategies to establish boundaries and maintain her own identity, separate from their expectations. Alexander officially quit law school and is in an education program now. He says he's the happiest he's been in years. And although our relationship is still in the process of rebuilding, I can see he's really trying to be better. My parents still don't acknowledge they did anything wrong. According to Aunt Victoria, who still talks to my mom occasionally, they tell the story as if I had some kind of mental crisis and abandoned them for no reason, completely refusing to admit they asked me to sacrifice my education. Hannah told me that at Thanksgiving they acted as if I simply didn't exist. I didn't even mention my name, which I guess is better than continuing to paint me as the villain. And you know what? I don't care about their approval anymore. For 20 years, I sought validation from people who were never going to give it to me, because in their world, I was never going to be as important as Alexander or Hannah, and that's their problem, not mine. I built my own life without their help. I'm thriving in ways I never could have if I had stayed trapped in that toxic system where my only purpose was to serve the family, and I'm proud of myself for having the courage to leave, even though it was terrifying, and even though I had no idea how I was going to survive. Last week I had a therapy session. Yes, I went to therapy finally, something I should have done years ago, and my therapist asked me if I would ever forgive my parents. I told her honestly I didn't know, that maybe someday if they ever acknowledge the damage they caused and make real changes, but that forgiveness isn't my priority right now, healing is. I'm focused on becoming the best version of myself and creating a life that makes me happy. Not on waiting for people who never valued me to suddenly realize my worth. I'm 20 years old, I work 2 jobs, I'm about to finish my 3rd year of university, and I finally feel in control of my own life. It wasn't the path I expected to take, and it definitely wasn't easy, but it was necessary, and I wouldn't change my decision to leave even if I could. This is my story, and for the first time, it's really mine.